Good afternoon, everybody. It is 4:04. My red light is on, just not very loud.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Testing.
Try.
I want everybody to hear me. Oh, Jim. Per our conversation this morning. No, it's not a yes or no question. Lucky for you. No, planning next won't be on. They'll be on next week. The next meeting. We got to approve this first, and then we're sending it off. Oh. Test 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Still not on. Okay, that's all right. We'll go from there.
Just keep talking loud and use your microphone because it's doing different, and I'll see how I adjust it from here.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started while the mayor adjusts the volume on the system. Now it's 4:06. We're going to start this meeting again. The May 16th Strategic Planning Committee meeting will come to order. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. Looks like we have full attendance today. Certainly appreciate that on this beautiful day. We really have one item on our agenda today, and that is to review and vote on approval for the goals and why do I keep forgetting the second word? Hang on one second. Goals and objectives. Thank you, Jacqueline. Goals and objectives for our strategic plan. And before we do that, though, I would like to get approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which is May 3rd. Those were circulated by Jacqueline. There we go. Thank you, Mayor. Did everybody have a chance to review the minutes? Okay. And let's get a motion on can I get a motion to approve? So moved by
I would like
Auditor Stasiak, and discussion.
I would like to move to approve, subject to about halfway down, it says Stasiak asked what the process is. It should say Stasiak disagreed, then asked what the process is. And at the bottom, I wanted it noted in there that that I expressed that I do not support payment of additional funds at this time to Planning Next. I wanted that specifically outlined in there.
Very good. Thank you, Jim, for that clarification. Jacqueline, are you good with that?
Disagree and ask what the process is, and then can you repeat the second?
I just put that I did not support payment of additional funds to Planning Next at this time due to the outstanding contract items.
So we have amended the minutes. So now we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended. Any other further discussion? Seeing as there are none, all in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please say aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion passes. The minutes have been approved. Now, moving on with today's meeting and agenda items, we have one really of note. Our goal today was to review the objectives and goals and then vote on their approval. After our last meeting, the mayor sent out a red line version, which would have shown you all of the changes that were made. And then I believe we also have a clean version here. Is this a red line?
Yep, so that's the clean version, which was also sent out. So this is the clean version just of the goals and objectives, which is what we were going to consider today. I do have the red line pulled up if there was a question on anything, but hopefully everybody had time to review them prior to today.
How would we like to proceed? Should we review each one, read through them, or are you all good to read? And someone make a motion? I will leave that mayor.
I was just going to make a motion to approve as circulated. It's what we've been discussing the last couple of months, so I think we're ready to approve.
We have a motion and a second to approve as they are written here in front of us. Discussion. Mr. Auditor.
Have all the areas where we were asking for language suggestions been totally done and suggested and implemented in this version?
Yes. The only thing so this incorporates all of our previous changes. The only one that I think I modified and circulated to the group outside of our prior discussion was where we got rid of an item and moved them. There were 2 action items, I believe. So I think it was the fiber, and we moved them to facilitate expansion. And so those were made into under 7. They were both previously action items, but the support the expansion of private fiber networks to encourage competition accessibility, I listed as an objective. Because if you recall, we had these both and we said we just need to move them under 7, but we didn't define how we wanted them represented. And I felt like the 4.3A was a good objective level rather than just an action item level, so that it was still represented under 7, because otherwise it wouldn't be represented under 7 at this time. Does that make sense? So previously the objectives was 4.3, and it was leverage broadband/fiber network infrastructure for business and residents. And we said, get rid of that as an objective, but that we've still liked the 2 action items that were underneath it. And we said, we'll move those under a connected city. And so 4.3A, facilitate the expansion of fiber networks, including city government owned, and encourage competition and encourage inclusion of conduit for utilities broadband when reconstructing roads to protect the life of pavement. All I did was I took 4.3A and morphed it into 7.4, support the expansion of private fiber networks to encourage competition and accessibility.
Mr. Auditor.
Thank you. Question, I didn't anticipate that being up a level when it moved, and would we want to change support the expansion of private fiber networks to just, support and encourage competition and accessibility for communication networks rather than just fiber? Because technology is changing so quickly, point to point, hard line, with what we're doing with some of the other systems that are out there. I don't know that we want to limit that to fiber, do we, at this level, at the second tier of this document?
Mr. Hellman.
I think it's a valid point. Do you have a suggestion for wording? And this will probably be updated every, 4, 5, 6 years anyways?
I would expect probably more frequently than that, but there will be opportunities for that, certainly. Yes, Mr. Auditor.
I would just change the word private fiber to communication network. Swap 2 words for 1.
Support the expansion of cable networks or communication. Thank you. Or would it be best to
Certainly.
just say support the expansion of technology to encourage competition and accessibility?
It's even more broad.
I'm sorry, the point is, I think of this one is that it is network or communications based. So I think it's 6 of one and half dozen the other, but I think there's validity in leaving the word networks or communication systems or something that specifies that we're talking about because ultimately the point is that the city is connected. People can get out to the world in a variety of ways. And I heard the funniest story. I heard a story about a person, young person, who has 3 full-time jobs, 8 to 5. They're making over $300,000 a year, and none of the 3 companies they work for know about any other companies, and they do it because they're so connected. I'm not advocating that happened, but I'm like, that's being connected. That was unbelievable when I heard that story.
Other discussion. So, are we good with that change? Anybody have any suggestions?
I don't have a problem with it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hellman.
Move forward.
Very good. Other discussion. There were, looking at this, we had 2 places that says, does this fit here? Did we need to answer those questions?
So no, that was my understanding. I just kept those as notes because this is the document that's going to go back to planning next. And so it was really, we kind of had just said, does this make the most sense here? And so as they're reviewing it, wanted to highlight that for them.
Very good.
I guess I'll call question.
Seeing as there's no further discussion. Mr. Greeno, did you have you sure? Very good. Didn't want to limit any questions or about this. Yes, Mr. Hellman?
I'm having a problem with the reading up there. I think it's just, maybe it's my angle. What is 4.43? Support education.
Yeah, so we changed this and it's now 4.3 in your clean copy in front of you and just said.
It says support education, skilled trades, and workforce development.
Oh.
It's 4.3. This is just the red line version. That's why it shows all crazy.
Okay, I got you. Sorry about that.
No
it's
worries.
all right.
Dennis, that's a good question.
I just wasn't able to read it right.
Very good.
So,
Yes,
so-
Mr. Auditor.
So to understand correctly, what's going to happen is this, if we vote this out, which it will likely do here in a few minutes, it'll go to planning next. And planning next then will look at it as a whole, and they could come back to us and make suggestions. So we'll likely have an embellished document to review that's more fleshed out. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mayor?
Yes, that is correct. And planning next, as was sent in the email, is going to zoom in for our June 6th meeting. That's when they will have the kind of document that has the process, more of the mission vision, the kind of whole framework for us to review, and any recommendations based off of what we give to them here. That would also include kind of a recommended process around receiving input, evaluating, flushing out action items, those types of items.
Very good. Mr. Russell?
I still like picking over individual words. Can you go to 4.5?
Yes, you may.
No,
Denied.
Nope, you went too far. 4.5.
right here, correct?
Oh, there it is.
Promote and preserve.
Are we really just looking to preserve the airport?
And promote it.
Are you thinking it needs to be more expansive?
I don't remember what we switched it from.
Let's see if we have our old. So the previous one was prepare and implement a Findlay Airport strategic plan to support strategic investment, increase utilization, generate economic development opportunity. I don't recall. I know we did discuss that because we said, which, we want to protect it, but then we said really we're trying to preserve it, but also promote it for additional opportunity. So, thank you, Mr. Russell.
Good question. Other questions? Seeing as there is none, and I've asked 3 times, let us vote. All those in favor of approving the goals and objectives as amended with the changes that we've just made here recently, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Congratulations. We have made a step forward in this process. So, what will happen from here, as the mayor said previously, was that we will send this on to Planning Next, and they will take a look at it, suggest any changes that they may have for us on, I don't know what they would look at, quite honestly. I don't think it would be content as much as it might be just placement, et cetera. They will also, and Mayor, tell me if I'm wrong and if I'm misquoting your previous statement, that they will come back to us and give us an idea of what the following steps will be and what the rest of the essentially starting to round out their receivables for us, correct?
That is correct. So if you recall, part of why we chose Planning Next is really the kind of process and aligning it, making recommendations on how does it fit into our existing budget process, those types of items, as well as how people can bring forward feedback throughout the year.
Very good. Yes, Mr. Hellman.
Clarification, and that will be either in person or video with Planning Next directly? It won't just come through the two of you?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're going to be zoomed in on our June 6th meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we may send, when we get the document, we'll send it out to you guys so that you have time to go through it. But then that's what we will be discussing at the meeting.
Thank you.
So as soon as we receive it, we'll push it out.
Thank you. I'll be there to catch it.
Sounds good.
I guess the question I would have then, since we are sending this on to Planning Next, I guess it's a possibility that they may shift things around a little bit. So we would not take this document and send this to council for approval. Am I correct in my thinking?
Correct. This would just be included with our committee notes, this version. And then, then at June 6th meeting, we would hear from Planning Next and then would review, and then that would be, once we vote that out of council, or out of committee, that formal document would go to council.
Very good. So with that, I guess we have two choices here. We can, at this point, dismiss our meeting and call it a day, or if you would like to further discuss or just actually start discussion on the process that we would undertake on how we'll start to fill out the leaves of the tree, so to speak, and how that process might work. I know there was some discussion on this, and we may want to take a little bit of time since we've only been in the meeting now for 20 minutes. What is the committee's appetite for that at this point in time, Mr. Auditor?
I sent to everybody a copy or a link and a copy to the state ethics training. And I also checked our records, and I show that only one council person has turned in that they've taken the current sunshine law training under this term. And that's Councilperson Frischie, I believe. Nobody else has turned in records that they've completed their training for this term. So I guess I would ask if this group as a whole has considered taking that training, and if not, I would think it would be wise for us to consider a motion to adjourn to give everyone time to consider that. So rather than put people on the spot, because I'm going to continue to push that, I do not think we should move forward. I'm going to be adamant about that unless you've had the ethics training and taken the ethics training. So with that in mind, I'll make a motion that we adjourn, presuming that everybody hasn't had a chance to take that training.
Jim, the question I've got, you've mentioned two different things here. You had sunshine laws and ethics training.
Sunshine, open meetings laws. I know our folks, you're supposed to take that every term. Your terms are 2 years.
Yes, sir.
I only have one council person that's turned in that they've taken it. So I presume people haven't had time to take that. So it's logical to assume people haven't had time to take the ethics training the last 2 weeks. So being courteous, and rather than putting people on the spot, we're talking about that in more detail, which we should. I thought I'd make a motion to adjourn and give us the opportunity to prepare ourselves before the next meeting when we get into more detail.
And I understand that. I guess here's my question. So you brought that up in the last two meetings, and the question I guess I have for the continued pushing of the ethics laws to this group specifically. What's your concerns with this group specifically? It's not versus all of council.
I don't think that's a accurate portrayal of my concerns.
Okay.
But this group is in the middle of something. I'm a participant in this process. It is clear that the way the ethics laws work, you have individual liability yourself. And it would be, I think, a mistake for people not to recognize the risk or the liability that they may have. They may understand it. Everybody may be well versed to it, but my presumption, based on the lack of comments or lack of people who have said that they've taken that course, besides the mayor and myself, that many people have taken it. I don't want to presume one way or the other, but those laws are very serious. They encompass a lot of areas, and we have people in this room that are on a lot of boards and represent a lot of other organizations, and may or may not even have side businesses or businesses they represent. And I'm not an attorney, but I disagree with the statement that was made in our last meeting that just because something was said publicly, you have the right to talk about it here in this room if you have a conflict of interest. And I think it's important that each individual on this committee develops their own understanding and gets their own questions answered as to where they may or may not have a conflict and what the appropriate behavior is. And I think to not allow that to happen or to make statements that would be presumptuous for other members of this committee with regards to what those rules are would be a mistake.
So, Jim, let me see if I can surmise what you're saying, that you think in the process going forward, which is adding the detail to the goals and objectives of the strategic plan, that those conversations could be of such topic that would people would have I want to say liability, but that's conflicts of interest, potential conflicts of interest. So,
Wait, so to that,
yes, sir.
yes, I believe that the specific topics could lead or people could have conflicts. And I think it's important that each individual determine where their conflicts may or may not be, or have an understanding per the training, what their responsibility is, what the risks are. You know, it's each individual. And if people don't want to do it, that's fine, but I think we need to give them adequate time to do it, since it was just brought up at the last meeting.
I think now that I understand better what you're advocating for here, I think there's no problem with that. I would ask, Jim, that you would make that same plea in council tonight at 6:00 to all of council, because quite frankly, I think that qualifies for all 10 people, not just this committee.
I appreciate that request, and I'm happy to do it, and I know exactly where I can fit it in.
There you go. I think that would, honestly, I think that would be fine. I think that when we get into those discussions, that everybody, just like you have, everybody that's in this committee has been on council for quite some time, and I think we have a basic understanding. Now, do we all know those rules as well as you do? I'm positive we don't. Jim, there's nobody that knows them as well as you. But to go back to my initial thought was we could talk about the process of how we would continue forward. We don't have to talk about the details. I don't think there was any conflict in potential conflict in discussing the process. So, yes.
Didn't we vote on this at the last meeting?
No, we did not. I don't think so, Beth. We discussed it briefly, but I don't think we voted on the process specifically. There were
No,
two. I'm sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
I meant just having to do the ethics before we proceeded. I thought we voted on that.
Jim.
What we voted on, to clarify that, Beth, is I made a motion that we not that I was against moving forward with the document until we had a process and discussed whether or not we were going to take ethics. And that was turned down, and after we moved forward with getting the document to this point today, and now the document's going to planning next. So that's all it was. It wasn't specifically to the point that people need time to take ethics. And I wouldn't make a motion forcing you. In other words, that this group is required to take ethics per se, but I would highly recommend it based on the training I've had.
Thank you for the clarification. Mayor.
And, as I mentioned previously, I've done the training. I'll do it again here recently. I know Jacqueline recently did it, and a number of the other department heads have completed it. So if you have any questions about what to prepare yourself for or the riveting information, feel free to reach out to them. Jeff, I would say for today that we probably adjourn, and I would just make the request that folks continue to look at the action items. And one of the things that may be worth considering is with the action items, I think what we had previously discussed is, are we going to kind of divvy them up among committees? Are they going to continue to just be discussed here? Is it going to be a combination? And so maybe it would be worthwhile for everybody to go through those action items and start looking at them and see where you think they may fit in committees. Or if we start seeing a portion that doesn't make sense just to be under strategic planning but doesn't fit within a different committee, should a new standing committee of council be formed and or ad hoc committees, things like that. So I think that would be good just for everybody to take the time to review the document with that in mind. But otherwise, I think seeing what with city planning, what planning next brings back to us would probably be beneficial to wait on.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. And Jim, before I entertain your motion to dismiss, I didn't forget that. I would make a motion that we, for my recommendation on the meeting minutes, because I rarely get around to actually getting you all to discuss this before I write something down. I would ask that I would make a motion that our recommendation is then that we yeah, I was going to say, send this document to planning next for their review, and I guess meet again on the 3rd of June. No, June 6th, June 6th. Is everybody in agreement with that? Mr. Hellman?
I guess my thought was going to be, as we're going through this discussion, to continue forth with the goals and objectives like we had talked about initially, since we all made the effort to get here. And this is part of the strategic planning committee in the process, rather than adjourning, going home and coming back in another hour, to me is a big waste of time. I'd just as soon stay here and work through it. I mean, this has been a long, arduous, time-consuming process to begin with, and to postpone it, any part of it, I think is a mistake. I just as soon continue and let the responsibilities of going through the ethics course, which I've done, I think, twice now, let that be up to the individuals.
Understood.
But that's just my opinion.
How's the rest of the committee?
I
Mr.
concur-
Russell?
I concur with Denny.
You would like to continue on with the conversation. Mr. Greeno, where you stand?
I'm fine with that too. I'm not particularly crazy about going home and coming back, so if we can get some work done, let's get it done.
Let's have a nice office over there.
Yeah.
Work.
Ms. Warnicki?
I'm fine with that.
Very good. So with that, do we actually want to dive into, do we want to talk about the process first? I'm not sure I've got a clear understanding of where how the committee wants to proceed with this. As the mayor laid out, there's actually three different ways we could go about this. We could keep all of this inside this committee, which, up to date, it's been this group with a lot of input from the community has come up with the goals and objectives, and obviously all of the action items that are going to be discussed. We could keep that discussion within this group. We could look to, alternative two would be look to farm some of this work out to various committees, or we could do a hybrid of 1 and 2. I will tell you where my opinion lies is that, quite frankly, since we are the ones who have been fully immersed in this process since the beginning, I would tend to believe that this group is the best to continue forward. We've seen all of this information previously. We've gone over it several times. I think it would be best for us to continue that process with the caveat that if we believe we get to a action item that requires some additional work, we could always ask for outside help or outside input, which may require us to bring somebody in or farm out, ask for assistance from another group. But my preference would be to keep it within this group. Mr. Hellman.
If you're looking for another opinion, I agree with that.
Mr. Russell.
I concur.
Ms. Warnicki, thank you.
Come on, be like the rest of
Yeah, me too. No.
Thank you, Mr. Greeno. Very good. So I don't know, Mr. Auditor, should we vote on that or not? Are you good with where we stand?
Well, I would just add to it, because I think it's a good position, that you really, by having this being a standing committee of council already, have a major part of the process in place. In other words, initially you got community input. You're vetting that through this committee and will ultimately leave out your tree. And you certainly would want to create a process for the community to bring things to this committee as well. And the question is, how often do you do that? How regularly do you meet so that the committee's aware of that? And then I would envision this community not only looking for outside information where they need it, but to say, hey, we support the completion, design, and construction of the Strick Center, and we should send that to appropriations to make sure they're on board and they're going to fund it. In other words, just keeping it in this committee does not limit you from getting another committee's support and moving forward, much like you do with some of the other items.
Very good. So, with that, Mr. Hellman, would you like to start us out? Where are we starting? Yes, sir. Well, I guess we start at number 1. Mayor, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Sounds good.
Since
All
you're
right.
in control of the
I will
computer.
let me resave a new version so I can make notes and save them for records. Just ignore all my documents.
While you're fishing for that, can I ask a question?
Yes.
We don't have the A, B, C, D, and E pieces of this, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that's
So we're
why I
going to have
haven't
to go
pulled
off
up.
of what's on the screen. Yes, sir.
What is today's date? 16? Let me accept all changes, stop tracking, and let's start tracking again. Okay. All right, so moving into the action items. So action items related to 1.1. We have A through F, all related to emergency services. I will not read them unless there's one specific that folks wanted to discuss.
Mr. Wolfser?
Yes, Mr. Auditor.
I'm not sure that it fits here, but one of my questions, and it would be more generic, but goes to the Strick Center. I've heard at least a half a dozen comments from the public that the center does not fit aesthetically into the neighborhood that it's in. And they're concerned, and if you drive out there, those are some beautiful properties around, and we basically built a slanted Morton building. I wonder if, and I know it's not done yet, but I wonder if we need, as we're doing things like that, to make sure the public knows that it's either gonna be improved or something like that. Again, I don't know that that fits into that 1.1 point, but it's a good place to bring it up.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really a strategic priority unless we want to add something specific about aesthetics of community facilities. I would note, actually, it was on my note to have Chief Eberly send out a new rendering. We are looking at some aesthetic improvements. Additionally, there will be nice landscaping, which I think will really soften it. You know, we're not planning to do a bunch of masonry work or anything really crazy. I understand that would be nice, but we do have limited funds, so we try to use those strategically. But we will try to communicate. I appreciate you sharing that concern that you've heard from the public, and we can send something else out here soon.
Nothing flammable.
No, nothing. Some really cool steel.
Well, and I appreciate those comments because under 5, we've said we want it to be an attractive place, the city in general, and I think that applies to our buildings, and if it doesn't, we should modify 5 because we're going to require the public to take care of their property, and we're going to take care of our streets. I think anything we build should be aesthetically pleasing. So, but yeah, when I drove out there, I was disappointed, and that's no criticism of the function. I think it's a phenomenal function and going to be a phenomenal use for us in the facility, but it just doesn't fit the way it sits now.
Other comments on, Mr. Greeno.
Not on that subject, on another subject on that list, the establishment of an emergency operations center for the city. Are we looking at, I think the city already has some sort of a emergency operation, like during the flood, we split into 2 different areas and stuff like that. Are we looking at creating something new or just enhancing what we have, or?
So it'll be enhancing what we have. So right now, my understanding, and Chief Eberly could speak a little bit better to this, is we have a joint operations center and we have like a specialty operations center that we stand up in floods, but this would be a more consistent emergency department that would it's kind of formalizing processes that we currently have in place.
Okay.
Is that something that's a joint process between us and the county mayor?
Yeah, so this would be kind of the city's coordination with EMA in a more formalized sense.
Are you talking about a full-time department then?
No.
Okay. Because also up here that kind of fits into that limelight, but in a little different way. In 2012, the performance audit from the state auditor in 2012 dollars said if we merged dispatches with the county, we would save at that time $250,000 a year in operational expenses. There's an opportunity here to not necessarily endorse that or move forward with that, but to say that we need to continue to evaluate the best way to do dispatch and emergency operations for the city to be efficient and whatnot.
So Jim, are you proposing that be an additional leaf here?
I think I'm throwing it out there for conversation. It's
Yeah.
not my area of expertise, but I do know the performance audit was clear. It was a big savings. And that would ultimately end up under the sheriff's auspices, but like some things like EMS and some other services, the first one out of the business and government wins because it ends up costing you less in the long run.
Grant, you'll remember back when we paid to update our system for dispatch, did we not make that in conjunction with the county? They're on the same system now.
And
Yeah.
Tyler Systems, yeah.
Yeah. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm fine with talking about adding that as an item. That is something that we discuss, though there's not been any formal conversations recently with the sheriff's department because of some concerns. Obviously it's something that we can regularly evaluate.
So what if we made this establish or continually review opportunities to improve on emergency operations and dispatch for the city of Findlay?
Or efficiencies, yeah.
So I
Sure.
guess more so, isn't that we already have in here under the efficient government, evaluate structures.
Yeah, I don't think this falls there because ultimately, from the way I'm looking at it, the goal would be to look for an opportunity to get out of the business. So we're talking about if we can work with the county and eliminate duplication of services, this is more for the city the safety one, if we go back up to 1, is talking about today's goals. Today's objectives. Goals, are these goals or objectives? These are goals?
These are action
Action
items.
items, okay.
We've gone down one
Yeah,
section.
but I think they're kind of the same thing. I don't think you need a line for each one. I think you certainly could do both.
Yes, Ms. Warnicki.
I'm sorry, I'm lost because we aren't writing down what we're talking about. What, sorry. What are we doing besides an emergency operations center and what's the line we're thinking about putting in there?
So right now, what was brought up was, should we add something related to regular evaluation of a joint dispatch center? So currently, the sheriff's office and the city police department have 2 separate dispatch centers. It has been recommended in the past and discussed various times about merging those into one dispatch, and for a variety of reasons that has not moved forward. So though there's a cost savings, perhaps not operational benefit again, I'm not opposed to evaluating things. I think it is happening currently, just not in a formal process. So if someone would like to make a motion and provide language, we can certainly add that at this point.
So I guess going back to that, I didn't want to make a motion till we talked about it a little bit more, because can they be combined under 1.1B? Because establishing an emergency operations center, we either need to clarify that a little bit more, because that infers a full-time department. I don't think, based on your comments, that's what we mean. And could we insert comment there regarding dispatch and emergency operations, rather than say establish, say continually evaluate, continually something that this committee's, or would you want them separate?
I think they should be separate, because an emergency operations center, though that language may not mean much to us, is a uniform process of emergency response and communication. And so that is a standard emergency response structure within safety services. So I will make a note here that we can discuss between police and fire, how we can maybe clarify that for the public, for it to mean a little something clearer. But I would recommend that they be separate.
Jeff, I've got a
Yes, I'm sorry, Dennis.
No, just for clarification, I guess, an emergency operations center, that's not a new office or tent or
No.
something like that? Okay, that happens during a tornado or whatever. It is something that would be
It is
in
a
place.
structure for our team to operate in emergency situations. And it's a little more formalized than that. It is not adding new staff. It is not a separate department. It is a method of operations.
So by structure, do you mean building, or do you mean organizational structure?
Organizational structure.
It's an
So establish emergency operations center, yeah, that's misleading. That's not what that says.
take it up with the state and federal agencies that use
No, I
the
mean, it's
standard
the word
language.
establish that, I mean, we already have it, is what we're saying.
We do not currently have a City of Findlay independent emergency operations center. Currently, we function just within a joint operations center.
So why would we want to separate it? Because I'm not informed enough, but I guess if we're going to make this decision, we need to be educated.
Which is why I will go back to our emergency services so I can provide additional clarification back to you all on how this is, because it is a method of operations during emergency situations that would be it is something that we currently do in an unformalized way, and by formalizing it, it provides benefit. So
What
I will.
benefit? Me? Or
I am
grants?
not
Jim,
sure.
I think we need to, we'll discuss this further when we get additional information.
Jeff, is that the equivalent of a CERT drill or a CERT for marathon?
I would think so. But I understand what the mayor's saying. It's a formal process within the state code, and it uses this terminology.
Yeah.
So, and we don't have that currently. We don't have that. It's not a physical structure. It's an organizational structure. It's a procedural structure that happens in the situation an emergency situation.
Thank you. You clarified that better than.
Thank you. I listened to you for 5 minutes, so
And my follow-up question would be, is there a council committee that if this group wants that would review that? Is there another committee of council that fits under?
well, I think that this obviously to establish anything within council would have to go through council, right, and have to be approved by council, and then so I would guess that council would review that request, what committee it would fall under, I mean, in the review. So to me, this is, again, we're talking about action items here. So please, I think we need to make sure that we understand that action items don't actually happen until council takes action on them, all of council, not just this committee. These are things that we aspire to, but not necessarily can approve. This committee cannot approve anything for the city. Sir.
So in this case then, if there's not a council committee that would look at this, generally if this sounded like a good idea, the proper process for council to follow, so it comes out of here, it's recommended would be to have a committee of the whole meeting or something along those lines to get all of council up to speed and informed, so they can more formally decide to move forward.
I think
Is
that
a safe-
once it is proposed by the administration, then it would go to a committee of the whole, if that is deemed appropriate, and for discussion, further discussion. Yes, Ms. Frishy from the,
From the audience, I have a question on this, because you say we aspire where we want to go. But we have EMA, we have that contract. I think it would be beneficial to that group before you add that, to look at what the plan is. We have the cube that we've used the airport and other locations, we work with the county. So are you looking at duplicating a service, and why
No.
discuss it if council doesn't
It-
fully understand it to add it into the strategic plan?
it is not. It is not. The mayor just explained that we don't have this structure currently in place. So it is something that needs to be discussed within council so that we can put it into place. It may be found that we don't need it at all. However, I would guess that since both the fire chief and the police chief had come to the mayor asking for us to do this eventually, that maybe it is needed.
I just think we have to make sure we're not duplicating services.
Oh, I think that is a great point, Holly. But again, please, just because it's on this list does not make it so. Everything has to go through council. This is simply a roadmap for things that we would like to potentially accomplish, Mayor.
And again, this is, Councilwoman, happy to, again, get more information to better clarify this. This is not taking any responsibilities away from EMA. This can be things related to how procedures of operation, both in an emergency situation for City of Findlay employees, how we respond. So for example, there's a tornado in this building. What is our operations? Do we have an operations center? If there is an operations center, who is the point of communication? So we do these things for other entities in the community. How do we make sure that we are prepared, have procedures, et cetera? Nothing is being taken away from existing and or duplicated. It is making sure that our community is safe, that we have the best processes and policies in place, and that we are using standards that are known across the industry.
Mr. Stasiak.
I think that's some great information, but I also think as part of considering the process, are we talking about bringing the fire chief and police chief or acting chief in to talk to us about this so we get the information directly? I think there would be some value to that. So you certainly have a position on the issue and a better understanding than all, if not most of us, most if not all. But in my opinion, action items like this, we each one of us on this committee should have a thorough understanding of them before we're able to vote as to whether they belong or don't belong, and we deserve direct access to the information to get it. Hence some of the conversation we've had from getting information from certain groups. So my question for the group is, using this one as an example, is this a good example where it would be good to have the chiefs come in and talk to us directly about some of this, since we don't typically get that type of access and we don't get that information as well as the mayor's perspective, so we can really weigh this thing and use that approach for some of the other items where it's appropriate. I'm not advocating that you do that for every item.
Ms.
I-
Warnicki.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Two things. I guess I would trust the mayor to relay what the fire chief and police chief say, and I think for creating a procedure to be followed, which I think is what this is, would be enough. It's my opinion on that. And secondly, just point of clarification, you guys have mentioned twice EMA, and sometimes when we use abbreviations, what is that exactly? And what is that?
So they are the entity for the county that responds for emergency situation. So for
So
example,
that's a county thing.
yep, it's countywide, and we work with them very closely. Yep, so we have a contract with them, and it could be things like an easy one is in the event of a hazardous material spill. They are on scene. They're the ones working to do the reports, to kind of coordinate and facilitate. They also, right now we're working with them on the solar eclipse planning for emergency services. So they are a state mandated position in every county.
Sometimes
we
when we
coordinate
use these
with.
abbreviations, I
Yeah.
had the emergency management, but I didn't know what the A was for sure, and I also didn't know what they did, so just, thank you.
Yep.
No, point well made.
And I was just going to say, on this, this is probably a good one. We're changing it to evaluate an emergency operations center for the city of Findlay. We need to determine if when we put an action item in this is when we're putting it in here, I see this as a process for us to work through, right? So complete a design and construction. Okay, that's in process. We want to get it accomplished. Evaluate an emergency operations center for the city of Findlay. Okay, that's when we say, okay, you guys want us to do this. We put together the information. We provide it to you. You guys say, yeah, we want to learn more about that. Let's have a meeting. I don't see I don't see us before we're putting things in here going through that level of evaluation of each item. But I guess that's just kind of where I'm at right now.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that if we're going to vet through each one of these, then we should just, that's what council ultimately, that is their job.
Right, and we aren't trying to implement them today either.
Absolutely not.
Achieve a ISO class 1 doesn't mean today that we know everything that we need to do to achieve that, right? You're saying this is something that we're interested in achieving, and then the administration goes back to the departments and says, okay, this is something that they've said they're interested in doing. What does that process look like? Then we start putting it into a plan, and using those project plans that we've developed to say, here's what we think it's going to cost, here's how long it's going to take us. I think that's when this allows us to say, okay, these big things are important, and then give us a direction on, and here's how we think we're going to achieve it, and start bringing more of those options and details and execution back to you.
I think I will say this, and one point that I believe the auditor makes is that we should all have a basic understanding of what the request is. So this conversation that we just had to get further clarification about what an emergency operations center is was very well founded. I think I've got a good enough understanding of it that I would feel comfortable putting it into this list. Now, you just mentioned the ISO 150, is that a 100? I have no idea what that is. So that is something that I'd like to know what that is before I would put that in. And I believe that's pretty
Right.
much what the auditor has said all.
Well, right, because you look at the one above that, promote fire prevention, U.S. Fire Administration best practice research. I don't know what the hell those are. And
Right.
we should have a basic understanding of what those are before we include them. And I think later in plan, at least in one of the drafts I saw, there's some specific organizations mentioned. We should know what those organizations are before we put them in this document. I think there's a difference between making a decision. I agree. Council ultimately is the decision-making authority. But we should vet these enough where we believe they belong in here. And we've taken that approach so far, and I don't think we should back off that approach at this point.
I think your
for
point's well made.
expediency.
I think your point's well made, Mr. Auditor. And in fact, as you were saying that, I was starting to think about, how we could proceed with this and keep this on a decent pace. We may, on our meeting on the 6th, we may want to take these and assign each one of these two individuals with the idea that you would go back and pull some of this information together so that you would then be, and be the SME, the subject matter expert on some of this stuff to answer these questions a little bit quicker versus us going through here and saying, okay, what is an ISO 100 or a ISO class 1 rating? That would be assigned to somebody. They would say, hey, that's what this is. Or as Jim's example was, looking at specific committees or rules or outside organizations, you could give us a quick update as to what that was, which would be enough to get us through this conversation so you have a good understanding of it. So that may be something we would consider doing when we get down to doing this on a regular basis.
We can, Jacqueline has very graciously volunteered to start compiling information on these items, both from the internet as well as from our departments. I think all of our department heads have good understanding of these, and we can start compiling some resources for you all to evaluate. If there are specific items that you are not familiar with and you want to send us a list of those or call or something, that would be great as well.
Jim.
I would suggest that we take one section at a time like we're doing, but rather than winging it in the meetings, whether it's broken up and you have subject matter experts, or if we're just prepared, that we have that detail and we flush through that detail as part of the meeting so that we're all on the same page. In other words, one of the things that we saw in the last reviews is each of us look at the words in the sentences differently. And by having the conversation in the manner we did, we came to agreement as to what we thought that meant before we approved it. That should happen here. And I think if we come prepared, in other words, rather than just dive into section 1, had we started this meeting where here's the information that supports 1 and here's where we're at, here's 1B, here's 1C. If each meeting we come in and that information is prepared and we're looking at that point, here's the U.S. Fire Administration best practice resources, here's the ISO information, because like with the ISO one, we might say, rather than saying achieve it, evaluate the reasonableness of achieving class 1. So worth the cost.
Right.
So.
No, point well made. I think, quite honestly, I don't think anybody really knew we were going to dive into this stuff today. I'm glad we did because it brings up this conversation, which allows us to be more efficient as we move forward. So I think after our 6th meeting, we will take a hard look at how we potentially, Jacqueline, bless your heart, as maybe then what we should do, Jim, to that point, we've got a list. We have this list, Mayor. Maybe it would be beneficial for everybody to take a look at the list with new eyes from the standpoint of, hey, read each one of these action items. What in here do you not fully understand? Highlight it and send it to us so that Jacqueline could do her due diligence on it so that when we do get to that item for discussion, we would have that information. I think that might be a beneficial way of proceeding. I think it'd be actually relatively easy to do that because most of these things are going to be abbreviations or items that we, if you simply don't know what they are. But I do believe that now that we're looking specifically at the action items versus, we've been looking at at everything as a whole, it gives us the ability to get much more granular in our thought process. Mr. Hellman.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with what you said, and I too am delighted that Jacqueline has volunteered to research some of this. Thank God. But I think too, as we go through this thing, you take item 1.1C, maintain an updated disaster plan. What the hell does that include? I mean, it might be one thing to one group and one thing to another group. So somehow I guess we have to wade through that. And maybe Jacqueline's research will give us a bulletized list of what's included in it. And maybe the mayor knows. I don't. I mean, it could mean
We already have one.
Well, that's
but it
good,
is
then we can-
regularly updating
We
it.
could scratch that one
Well,
off.
no, because this is, and some of these are things that are going to be, you know, maybe we define it where it is updated once a year, you know, and we
Alright.
just, but that one was one specifically where it's, you know, we have this, we need to make sure it's regularly maintained.
All right.
Because you don't want an obsolete disaster plan when you have a disaster.
No.
So,
When you need
but
it.
no, I think a lot of these, you know, I would encourage you all to spend some time just Googling a lot of these. These are, especially, these ones are all, you know, very standard items, right? They're a little more unique because they're safety service related, right? So it's not things that we deal with on a regular basis. But, you know, this group has had this in a very similar form for at least 6 months. So I think, you know, we all should have a pretty strong understanding of the majority of this, but we can definitely go through and clean, you know, there shouldn't be FEMA, right? It should be spelled out, Federal Emergency Management Agency, or these different items. So we will take a look and try to better flesh it out and provide examples so you all know a little bit better what is being referenced in here. You know, some of these are just example kind of language that we would have to determine what they really are. But I don't think it will be too terrible. But if there is something specific, please let us know, just so we don't gloss over it, you know, thinking that folks understand.
Ms. Warnicki.
This is just my opinion as we go through here. And there, I agree, I don't know what an ISO Class 1 rating is either. Again, it's an abbreviation, so I have no idea what that is. I assume it has something to do with fire or something. But anyway, but like, for example, for the updated disaster plan, to me, that one's just fine, just as is. I don't think that we need at this level, or even at the council level, to look at the disaster plan to say if we think it's good enough or whatever. We're just saying that somebody on the administration should make sure that they maintain an updated disaster plan. I think that's the strategic plan item, and the doing of it belongs at the administration level. I mean, I know we did that in auditing back at Marathon for somewhere. We had to make sure that there were disaster plans for, you know, making sure the software was maintained or the hardware in the computer room was maintained or whatever. And I still to this day remember reading something that, you know, you can never have a perfect disaster plan. Noah had a pretty good one, but he had an above average consultant. I've never forgotten that statement. You know, you're never going to have a perfect disaster plan, but I don't think, just like for that line, you know, we're again doing these ad infinitum on every single line. And that one would be, in my mind, it's good enough as is. I know we're not there yet, but I'm just saying, we don't need to argue the disaster plan at this level. That's my opinion.
Jim.
Just saying.
I appreciate that, but I would add to that a slight disagreement in the sense that we should have a well enough understanding or a strong enough or a thorough enough understanding as to the interrelation of our plan with the county, with the EMA, with the commissioners. In other words, we're all out in the community doing different things. This just says maintain an updated disaster plan. It doesn't comment, it doesn't say anything, and we have no comprehension as to, is that inclusive of those working relationships that we have? Is it not? I think we need a little more depth of understanding. I think that's our due diligence as being members of this committee. So I'm going to disagree with you respectfully, understanding your point and getting your point, but I do think if the general public asks us, what does that mean and what do you have now? We should be able to answer that question, and I couldn't answer that question today.
I think the point well made. I think, though, that with the addition of the word evaluate or update, and actually probably the word evaluate, establishing, then takes us out of that realm of having to know exactly to the detail what that is. Or are you in agreement?
I'm not interested in knowing every detail. I'm interested in knowing lower than 50,000 feet. I don't want the executive summary. I want a little bit more in-depthness than that, but I don't want the operational view. In other words, I think we need to know enough and how it relates to other, in other words, here's the disaster plan. And we ask a few questions without getting into the nuts and bolts of it, and then we're good to go. But I think if we don't do that, if we don't get on the same page as committee, I don't think we're doing the community justice.
But
Just wanna keep-
again, isn't that the implementation of the disaster plan when it gets done instead of
No.
the strategic plan is just to make sure it routinely gets updated?
I don't think we can make the I don't think so. In other words, this is maintain updated disaster plan, and the question is that encompass enough what it should, is that the goal? Or should the goal be maintain an updated disaster plan and its relation to other entities, or does it already incorporate other entities? We can't answer that question without that knowledge. And it's not that in-depth, it's just a little bit deeper.
But that sounds like a paragraph, and we can't have a, anyway, I'm done. I've said enough.
We will also happily go through and items like this that we have, we will be happy to provide you all a copy of it so that you are well aware of the great work our department heads are doing in managing their jobs and departments.
Very good. I think that seeing it as 10 after the hour, we have 50 minutes till council meeting starts. I would suggest that we adjourn at this point in time. I think we've actually done quite a bit of good work because this has given us a good map for how we will proceed forward with the action items. By going through this one, I think we've brought out a lot of good things onto the table that will help us in this process. So with that, I would make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second by the auditor. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion passage. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your time.